Split pea soup dates back to the time of the ancient Greeks, when it was sold by street vendors at least as early as 500 BC. It was long regarded as a peasant food, but refinements were made over the centuries until it was sufficiently elegant to become a favorite of French aristocracy. The version I'm presenting here is based on that approach. It does take more work than the simple one-pot method you nearly always see these days, but the results are well worth it. If you don't cut any corners here, you will have the finest split pea soup you've ever tasted or probably ever will taste. I'm certain. I have 250 grams of dried split peas I've weighed out here. I'm going to transfer these to a sieve first, and I'm going to run some cold water over these. Then they go back into the bowl, wet of course. And I'm adding 500 milliliters, half a liter of water. Give them a little quick stir here. And now they need to sit. Now we're going to make the stock for this. We've got the ingredients for mirepoix. We've got about 120 grams of onion, about 80 grams of carrots, and about 80 grams of celery. A big whopping hunk of fresh thyme here. And although traditionally split pea soup is, in the U.S. at least, is made with ham hock, I'm using smoked ribs. This is going to give a much better flavor, and the meat will be nicer in the end too, in my opinion. Of course, you know, you can substitute ham hock if you can't get this. And in Russia, this is available, and smoked ham is actually quite hard to find. Smoked ham hock is very hard to find here, but the smoked ribs are easier to get. And these have a very intense, sweeter, nicer flavor than a ham hock, really. But you know, you got to use what you've got. So I'm going to chop up these vegetables coarsely, and we're going to begin pressure cooking the stock. So here's the vegetables in the bottom of the pressure cooker. I'm going to put the thyme down, and then I'm going to put the ribs over the top of that to hold the herbs down. And I'm going to add water. There we go. It's 1.5 liters of water. Toss in a few black peppercorns, and maybe a few more. And we'll get it started to heat up here. Now, after a few minutes, you see bubbles begin to break the surface, so you're going to put the lid on. When you have a strong flow of steam like this, now turn the heat way down to like 2 out of 1 to 10, and the steam will subside, the pressure will go down, and begin counting the time from here for about an hour. After the stock has cooled down, I've removed the meat and the ribs. Later, I'm going to pull the meat off of this, get rid of the bones. Comes off real easy now, of course. And then this meat is going to be chopped up, and it's going to be added back to the soup later on. And then we have the vegetables and all the broth, which needs to be passed through a sieve. Here it is after it went through the sieve. Now you know that the peas are done when they've swollen up to the point where they've reached the top of the water line. Remember, there were 250 grams of peas, rinsed, then 500 milliliters of water. They've swollen up to where they're just about at the top surface here. Now, just add a little bit of this, in the liquid from this, back in to the other broth. Maybe 150, 200 milliliters, something like that. And then the rest of the water from these peas is going to be drained off and discarded. Into a cold pan, 4-liter stock pot. I've got 2 heavy strips of bacon here, and I'm going to begin cooking these in a dry pan to render some of the fat off. And while this is going on, I'll cut up the shallots. Now we have the shallots that are cut into very large pieces. You're going to brown the surface of them. That's why you're not going to cut them up any smaller, otherwise they'll burn and be bitter. Okay, it's been a few minutes. I have not stirred this at all. I'm just going to add the shallots in there. Now we'll give it a little stir. We want to brown the shallots in the bacon fat. The heat's on medium, 5 out of 10. Be patient with it. After 3 or 4 minutes, you start to see some color on these onions. Now I'm going to add about half of the wine. Deglaze it. cook it down again. I can increase the heat a little bit from 5 to 6, just a little bit, speed it up just a little bit here. Want to get it down to where it's dry again. After another 3 or 4 minutes, you can see it's getting close to being dry again. Then when you see there's actually, or I should say you hear, there's some actual sizzling as it's getting very close to completely dry. Add the rest of the wine. It's a good time to add the bay leaf. And we're going to reduce this just a little bit more. Just about maybe 2 minutes more. And here we have, after a couple minutes, once again we're down to where it's very, very little liquid left in the pan. Okay, now the soaked peas go in. This is now it's the mixture of the broth with the pork rib in it, as well as a little bit of the liquid that the peas were soaked in. After 5 or 6 minutes here, soup begins to have some bubbles coming up the top of it. I'm going to reduce the heat down just a bit here to keep it at a simmer, and I'm going to put a lid partially on it like this, set askew, just so that it can still vent, but most of the liquid is going to condense back into the soup. We don't want to lose a lot of volume here. I've picked the bones away from the meat here, and at some point need to take a knife and cut this into smaller bits. Don't mince it. Don't take it into little tiny pieces, because then it won't be good in the soup. But you also don't want pieces that are this big, because this is not going to fit in a soup spoon. So cut it up into smaller pieces and then set this aside. We're going to add this after the soup is pureed, as you'll see. Just to show you, this is the level of slow simmer we're looking for. Every once in a while, give it a stir. Get the stuff up from the bottom. Again, partially covered. Let it continue to cook. The lid's not on all the way. After about 45 or 50 minutes, take the lid off of it. Continue cooking it. Get a little bit thicker than this, but no lid now. We're going to let it fan. Now, after about an hour and 5 minutes to an hour and 10 minutes, you pull the bay leaf out of it. Make sure that those peas are melted down quite well. And then I'm going to move this off the burner and let it cool for a little bit before I blend it. Let's return to the same pot. And then the chopped rib meat goes in. Maintain it at a simmer for 15 to 20 minutes. Keep it at a very slow simmer like this. If you taste it and it seems bland, that's because there's no salt yet, but you need to reduce it more before you really adjust the salt so you don't put too much in. I'm very pleased to announce the release of Volume 3, The Focus on Food Chemistry. I want to clear up a few things about these 3 volumes. First, they all contain completely different information. There's no duplication, they're not revisions. When I wrote Volume 1, I had 2.5 years of YouTube videos to cover. People had been asking me for the printed list of ingredients for all of those dishes, and so I obliged. There are recipes with stepwise directions and many tips offered throughout, as well as an extensive history of Russian cuisine over the last 1,000 years, but Volume 1 is very different from Volume 2 and 3. In Volumes 2 and 3, I only had about 9 months of YouTube recipes to cover in each, so I was able to provide stepwise directions for everything. In Volume 2, I included a lot of additional information about cooking and some simple examples of flavor chemistry to set the stage for Volume 3.
While Volume 2 hopefully got you thinking about some of the processes that go on in cooking and how flavors are expressed and sensed at the molecular level, the topic was painted with pretty broad strokes to make it easy to digest, pun intended. Volume 3 is a milestone of the series, in which I have included an entire introductory course in food chemistry, which is why Volume 3 is about 70 pages longer than Volume 2. And if you just want the recipes, that's okay too. You don't have to read the first few chapters. But if you've ever been curious about what influences tastes and flavors and the rationale for deciding cooking times and temperatures and why things taste different when they're combined in different ways, this book will answer many of those questions. It also paves the way for Volume 4, which will be next year. I'm pleased to announce a new, completely different type of cookbook. If you watch my channel regularly, you know that the recipes I present are usually centered on meat or seafood and seldom vegetarian dishes. This new book is a departure from that norm. Only vegetables, fruits, eggs, and dairy are used in dozens of recipes here. The key here is that these recipes don't taste like typical vegetarian food. This isn't a bunch of salads and bean sprouts wrapped in pita bread. These are completely satisfying, hearty dishes that use the science of food chemistry to produce meat-like aromas and flavors. But don't worry, there's no weird chemicals involved, just ordinary foods and spices that you can get in any grocery store. This really is an entirely new approach. These are flavorful, filling meals produced by a distinctive cooking method and unexpected combinations of ingredients. Once you see how it's done and understand the method, you can apply these preparations to some of your own recipes and transform them into vegetarian dishes too.
Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.
If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link.